Welcome to the Learning Conversations, an Education Scotland podcast presented by Chief Executive Gillian Hamilton. In every episode, Gillian is joined by teachers, professionals and experts to unpack some of the big questions and topics facing the education sector in Scotland. Over to Gillian as she introduces today's guest.
Today I'm joined by Karyn McCluskey, the Chief Executive of Community Justice Scotland. Karyn, I know that you first trained as a nurse, then in psychology, then went on to spend 21 years working with the police and helped establish the Violence Reduction Unit in Scotland in 2003 with a public health approach to preventing violence. I know you're a member of the WHO Violence Prevention Alliance and you helped set up the Medics Against Violence charity in Scotland, which speaks to school children about violence reduction, injury and keeping safe. If that wasn't all enough, Karyn, you're also a non-exec director at the Scottish Professional Football League, a board member of Simon Community Scotland, a trustee of Medics Against Violence, and chair of the Centre for Justice Innovation. And I often read your fortnightly column for The Scotsman, so I'm really delighted that you're here with us in the studio today. You know the old adage about ask a busy woman?
I know, and I'm delighted to be here.
Brilliant. Well, we're delighted to have you. I've got a whole lot of things I want to talk to you about, because we'll be really interested, as you would expect, on education, the wider impact on children and young people. And if you had to think just in a couple of sentences about the work that you do and the impact it has on children and young people, what would you say about that?
Oh, my whole life's about prevention. If you cut me through the middle like a stick of rock, I'd have prevention right the way through. And when people say to me, why do you keep doing it? Because I've done it for a long time now, and I think I'm as passionate about it now as I ever was. It's when I go into schools, and I love going into schools. I love kids. I'm an ex-nurse and a baby botherer. I like babies. And I know that for us to change Scotland and for us to change the country, we've got to create the best environment for our kids so they can thrive and survive and be what they want to be. And that's in a way why I do it, and even working with people who are in the justice system. They've got kids, and I want to see, I need their kids to have a different life from their parents.
So I totally agree with you. I'm laughing. A quick aside, I was speaking to student teachers recently about education and the power of education, and this young woman at the end came over and spoke to me and she said, thank you so much. You made me cry. I can't believe someone as old as you is still so passionate about education. I took that as a compliment, Karyn, but it came into my head when you were saying I've been doing it all my life. But that preventative piece right at the outset for children and young people, what difference does it make if we get that right?
Well, I mean, the thing is, if you look at other countries, so if I look at Finland, and I used to do a whole thing called I want to be a bit more like Finland. When Finland felt they were falling off the cliff in the 1970s, it didn't create more antisocial behaviour orders and all the stuff that we tend to do. They took around 5% of their population and made them pedagogues, so they support every child in the family until the age of, I think it's the age of 8. And the kids don't go to school until they're 7, which slightly, I was like, oh, my kid's desperate to go to school at 5. And when they go to school, their outcomes aren't about reading and writing and such like, although that's important. Their outcomes are around turning out the best equipped kids to meet the needs of the nation. But what they were focusing on was communication, problem solving, team working, empathy, compassion, all the skills that make you a great human being and make sure that you can get through life without bumping into all the things that we know that are catastrophic, and making good decisions about themselves. And they don't have that sort of testing regime that, that lots of countries have. But when they actually eventually test their kids at the age of 14, they turn out the best educated kids in the world. They're constantly top of the OECD PISA study. So, who knows, know? And that good support's as close as it gets to being magic without being magic.
Being magic without being magic. I mean, there's big messages for me in there already, Karyn. Our core role of Education Scotland, we're subject to education reform. Core part of our work going forward is leadership of the curriculum improvement cycle. So some of those skills and attributes that you talked about there, there'll be people listening to this that are thinking, spot on, that really needs to be part of the work that we're taking forward. And there's also a bit of a debate in Scotland around, you talked about starting school age, there's a debate around some of that, around the optimum time for that to take place. If we get it right that early stage, Karyn, if we get the curriculum right and the support's right, what are we stopping later on? What are we helping? You talked about prevention. What are we helping?
It's really interesting. So I have spoken in the last about 3 weeks to about 2,000 people. The majority of them 16 and 17-year-olds, who I just want to tell you are all taller than me, which is, is a bit upsetting. We're definitely feeding young people differently from when I was young. And can I tell you, I'm absolutely gobsmacked at them. I had 350 last week. And they'd come from like Glasgow, and they were having a big lecture, and they were amazing. The questions they asked, the engagement they had about it. I was asking them about how they felt safe, if they felt safe, how they engaged with the media, what they learned. And that generation are making better decisions about their life than we ever did. They're not drinking as much, they're not taking as much drugs, they're engaging much in social issues and environmental issues. They are amazing. And I always get a bit angry at the mainstream media when they demonise the young.
Me too.
Because, we shouldn't be weaponising them because they're much better than we were. If I look at the people who are in prison now, when I started all those decades ago, it was 17, 18, 19-year-olds. Now it's 35-year-olds. I would suggest that 35-year-olds are the ones that we failed to prevent. And that, I hate to use the word flattening the curve, but you know what I mean. That actually, because we've got no under 18s in prison.
I know.
And we've only got a very small number of 18 to 20-year-olds. That's because of teachers keeping kids in school, and I practice zero exclusion, and teachers are always like, you've no idea how hard that is. And I'm like, but it's so essential. And so we are preventing kids touching the justice system and making sure that they make good choices about their life, that they're supported. Although sometimes, and I obviously got, a kid, sometimes they're just idiots and they just need to be allowed to grow up. We know their brain doesn't develop until they're 25. We know that the risk-taking part of the brain is much more developed than the other part of the brain that says that might not be a great idea. And we can all remember being like that when we're young. And sometimes we just need to let them grow up, make mistakes in a safe way. Hopefully nothing extreme happens. That's very unusual. But generally, we've done pretty good in Scotland. I know everybody's negative. Everything. We've got that real Calvinist thing, that, what's the weather like today? Oh, it's no bad. It's probably rain tomorrow. But actually, we've done a lot of stuff. We have reduced exclusion. We have tried to, adapt how, we understand trauma and resilience and attachment. It's pretty phenomenal.
And I think sometimes we don't do enough to celebrate that, share it, shout about it. I think we've all got a responsibility in that space, to recognise that and be proud of what we've done in that space as a nation, knowing there's always more to do.
Absolutely. These are not opposing moral universes. You can say, yeah, absolutely, we've done all this. It's fantastic. I go down to other places in other countries, and talk about adverse childhood experiences, about how kids react, about attachment, and they're like, they look at you askance. I couldn't go into a school in Scotland where they don't know about that, and I can feel the environment. I love going into Dalmarnock Primary. I'm sure they've probably got a restraining order against me now, but because I love some of the work that they do, how connected they are to the community, how the parents are connected. And so, so that's nice. But then you can also say, yeah, we've got much further to go. We know that some kids, suffer more disadvantage than others. And we've got to work much harder to make sure that they succeed and thrive as well.
You talked about zero tolerance for exclusion and the importance of young people being at school. So attendance is a challenge for many schools just now.
It is.
And I speak to lots of head teachers who are doing amazing work to encourage and to support young people to be in school. Head teachers talk a lot about mental health challenges and anxiety in that space. You talked about a change in our young people. Are you seeing that too, Karyn?
Yes, I think the world tilted on its axis after COVID. And, I see it in adults as well. I look at some environments where people are now working completely remotely. I'm going to just tell you, I disagree with that. I think human beings are born connected. I think we learn and we develop our values in concert with each other. I need to look at your eyes and I know your body movements to see, how we're communicating. Am I connecting with you? Can we speak the uncomfortable truths amongst friends? It's all right for us to disagree, but can we disagree well? I don't know how you do that in an online world, an online space. And people switching off their cameras, they're distracted by phones. So I quite like getting together with people. And for our young people, I mean, I'm just going to base this on my own experience of being a parent and trying to parent my daughter. They're quite happy sometimes in their bedroom speaking to all their friends, etc. But when they're even happier is when they're outside with their friends and they're engaging and sometimes they just need to be encouraged to do it. But I realise it's a tricky thing. And when I'm asking teachers, to do a zero exclusion, because I'm always saying one more kid you keep in school is one less kid I'll have in jail. Because they get picked up by the police and the outside and then they get touched the justice system and then it's like an infection. It becomes lifelong and life limiting. When my dad was alive, my dad was a head teacher, like he was head of biology. And he used to say, that's a really hard ask. It's a hard ask. I said, I know, but it's so important. It's so important because everybody I meet in jail, their story always starts with, see when I was 5, see when I was 7, see when I was 11. Their story starts early on. And then they'll tell me about being excluded from school. And, they're not hiding. We know their trajectory.
Absolutely.
And I know teachers, if I put them in front of a class of, primary ones, they'll be able to pick out the kids who find it difficult to learn, difficult to engage, difficult to listen.
And can I ask, Karyn, you and I have both said schools are doing a great job in that space, teachers are doing a great job. Is there any advice you would give teachers? You talked here about knowing at an early age or keeping them in school, not excluding. Is there anything more as an education profession you think we should be doing that we're not?
So that's a really interesting question. So what I'll tell you about the great teachers that I've met and the great head teachers is sometimes you've got to lead outside your authority. Sometimes you've just got to, look at your school and look at your students and their learning environment and think, what else could this look like? Have a philosophical thought experiment with yourself around, sometimes without any methodology or results, around what could improve it. So I was at one school, which, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying, had a pretty poor inspection result. Anyway, a new head teachers come in, and he looked at the experience of the primary 7s going into first year, and what they've done is something really extraordinary. They've sort of hived off a little bit of the school, and they brought some of the primary school teachers in to first year. So almost like, they're sort of drip feeding them in incrementally into the sort of senior school. They made sure that the toilets were, so they got everybody to hand in their phones and etc. So created this very thoughtful environment. And the kids were finding the toilets quite threatening and there was lots of problems there. So they managed to, they put teachers in and some of the pupil support teachers in to try and make that area safer. And it's completely transformed. And see, when I went up to speak to the teachers, I thought they were amazing. And the students, the kids were fantastic. But I got really angry. In fact, I wrote about it in The Scotsman because I was really angry. I got out at a station and I said I wanted to go to a school. And a taxi driver said to me, oh, that's where the scum kids go. And I looked at him and I was so angry. And I wished I'd been smart enough to say, my daughter goes there. And you try, anyway, I wasn't. So I made a phone call to a friend of mine who's in the police and made it very clear that I was speaking to the police when he was on and his temperament changed. And what I said was, I actually said to him, these are good kids. They're fantastic kids and it's a fantastic school. But isn't it interesting around, and I say it all the time, and it wasn't just about that one school. It's about how adults put their own value structure on things without any evidence base whatsoever, without any understanding about what's going on in environments or how challenging places are for young people and the pressures that are on them.
And Harry Burns used to talk about not, I'm going to get my quote totally wrong, but not judging people for what they don't have, but admiring people for the resilience that they do.
Absolutely.
I'm misquoting the misquoting Harry Burns, but that's the same sentiment in that every young person in Scotland deserves the right to thrive and exceptional education. And we've got a job to do in that space.
We have, and we've also got to take a deep breath. I mean, it's why I quite like some of the Scandinavian countries, their approach to sometimes how they deal with the young is they just say, when young people do something daft or sometimes it can be a sort of low-level offending, they just take a deep breath and they just think, we've got to see them through this. Actually, if we can get them out of the system, if we can get them through to the other side, they generally meet someone, get a job, make good decisions about their life. But there's that risk-taking part that's later on, which is always a challenge.
Tell me a wee bit. I feel you and I could speak for about 3 hours. Don't know whether people would want to listen to us for 3 hours, Karyn, but I'm sure you and I could talk for 3 hours. Tell me a wee bit about Community Justice Scotland and the specific role that they play in Scotland.
So it was started about 7 years ago. Community justice is a really complicated thing in many ways because it's about all the services that keep you safe before you go into prison, after you come out. Or if you serve a sentence in the community. But when people ask me about it, so my mum often says, what is it you do again? I'll say I'm the prevention service. There to stop offending for the first, the third or the 70th time.
Okay.
So the first part is about the work that I do in schools and I am passionate about how we link up education and how education is part of my prevention strategy. I know probably teachers don't see it as that, but I see it as that because I think they are. And then for those that end up in the justice system, how do we divert them out early on so they don't get infected by it? Because it's pretty trauma inducing once you're in. And so I think Scotland's done loads and loads, and my colleagues in the Centre for Youth Justice have done a huge amount around how we should deal with young people who are in conflict with the law to try and keep them out and make sure we know that if we divert young people, 80% of them never come back in. They just need a wee bit of help. Sometimes with their mental health. Sometimes it can be with just general education. I think sometimes young people, and I have seen it, can pretend that they know how to read. But they can't. And they struggle, so their behaviour in the classroom can be really challenging, but it's telling you something about how they're engaging with, their studies because they can't read, they can't understand it. I've come across young people who have been diagnosed with really severe dyslexia and dyscalculia, much like in their 20s. And you wonder how on earth they managed to stay at school and it not be picked up. But I understand why that happens sometimes.
And when you talked about prevention running right through you and that being a core part of what you do, but we don't prevent every young person or every adult. No society can do that. I also worry about our children and young people who have parents who are in prison and the importance of them being seen and heard. Does Community Justice Scotland have a role in that space?
So we do. So sometimes adults end up in the justice system, and you're right, we can't do anything about it. So often you'll get parents who end up in a community justice sentence, so they'll get a community sentence, or they'll end up or they might end up in prison. And what we know is that young people are really affected by that. They're embarrassed by it. They feel that they've got no say, no part in the justice system. So Perth and Kinross have been one of the first ones to do it. They're doing a child impact assessment. And that's not about the kid per se, but it's about their needs. So, and it's something I really dislike. And when I was up in the islands, sometimes names appear in the paper. Social media is toxic, and kids are affected by that. Stories get out, they become the focus of it. So these, often very young children, but sometimes, like kids in their teens, they're the butt of jokes. They are, everybody's whispering. So the child impact assessment goes through about what the child needs, how they would like to be, what they would like to know, how they would like to be spoken to, what they would like other people to know about them, what they would like to be able to say to their parent. And it's it's a very detailed, but very much keeping the child at the heart of their decision making, which I always think is the nicest thing, because you always make the right decision if you keep the kid at the heart of your decision making. And it's about giving them a voice and agency. Young people need agency as well. You know, they need to have a say over how they're dealt with. You know, they're we human beings in their own right. You know, they've got rights, and this is about doing that. And I think it's a great move forward.
And you talked here about that happening in one local authority, but are you aware of it happening more widely?
It's spreading out. It's spreading out. Perth and Kinross, I think maybe Fife started it off and we're trialling it. And now Families Outside, who are a great wee charity, are like spreading it through the country and training lots and lots of people about how to do it. So we can't always change the outcome for the parent, but we can certainly change the outcome for the kid.
Mm-hmm. And do you know Amanda Corrigan at Strathclyde? Amanda Corrigan does a lot of work. She's in the Institute of Education and does a lot of work about the voices of young people who are affected by imprisonment. I must connect you to Amanda. Yeah. I'm sure you'd really like to meet her and talk about the work that they're doing. Those are a couple of examples of work that's happening. Are there any other examples of really innovative or different practice that you pick up in your travels that you think folks should know more about?
Well, I mean, they know because I talk about them all the time. So some of the work that Glasgow's been doing in restorative practice, I think has been really quite transformational, I would say, because, I mean, what they've been teaching their young people, and, you know, and I went into primary school classes, you know, and they've got coloured cards on their desks, and they're teaching young people how to engage, how to listen to others. Like, so if they've had a fight, you know, in the playground or whatever, you know, something that's you know, that's been an issue. So they teach the kids about how to listen to the other person and to give themselves space that they can talk, and to come up with a solution themselves about how they sort it out. I mean, if they could only teach the adults that, we'd be cooking on gas. And if you speak to Charles, the head teacher in Dalmarnock, he talks about some of the great work and some of the great outcomes. The really interesting bit is when I've been talking to him about, you know, how the kids sort out the problems themselves, and sometimes they're even speaking to the teachers and trying to engage them in sort of restorative practices. I mean, I think it's phenomenal. What a great skill to be teaching our young people about how to negotiate and navigate your way out of, and speak to each other, you know, which I just think is absolutely lovely. But what they said the biggest issue was, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, was the kids were fantastic. Kids did it natural, learnt it, practiced it. It was the adults that really struggled with it. Because, you know, a kid would go home and say, oh, this happened and I did this, I spoke to them and we sorted it out. And the adults would be coming out of school saying, I want him expelled. And you're thinking, how can the kids be better than the adults? You know, but they are, because we've got a whole generation of people who feel that they've never learned to negotiate and to, you know, to understand others' perspective. And it seems to be the age of rage.
I like
you know,
that.
The age of rage is where everybody's just shouting at each other and nobody's listening. And I think we've just missed that moment of reflection where we can try and appreciate someone else's perspective, not necessarily agree with it, and try and work together about how we will go forward. And
you've talked a number of times already about prevention. I was really struck by what you were saying there about, you know, the adults sometimes saying, yeah, but I want that to happen or this to happen. And sometimes there's a misconception that restorative practices mean that there are no repercussions. And that's not true.
I actually think it's the opposite.
Absolutely.
I think it's the opposite. I think it's much harder to engage because you have to, you know, that bit when your heart's pumping and you're feeling really nervous about going into something, and you have to face up to some things that you've done. Mm-hmm. And restorative practice, I mean, even when we do it with adults, it's not necessarily about forgiveness, but there is understanding that comes out of it. And often when we're saying to the kids, you know, what do you think should happen to you? They'll probably sometimes say, you know, it'll be a punishment greater than you'd ever have. If you were just doing it yourself, you wouldn't have said it would be that extreme, but they would say, oh, well, I think this should happen to me, or I'm going to do this. And actually, I think that's a great skill for life.
Absolutely. And you'll know about the MVP programme.
Yes, so we started MVP in the Violence Reduction Unit, yeah.
And the impact of that in schools. I was in a secondary school recently speaking to a whole number of the senior pupils who'd been trained in that programme. and their reflections on it just blew me away about it. Both of the impact on them in their learning, but also in the maturity of the approach.
And, that whole idea about bystanders, about, around how you change the norms around your group, around how they might be speaking about girls or what they're seeing online, and there's such toxic influences, We could talk about Andrew Tate all day and about that toxic masculinity and how that is nudging young people's behaviour in some ways that are quite abhorrent. And around how peers can change that again and say, look, that's not really on, that's not really how you should be speaking, because that's what matters to them in the long run. Social media will come and go eventually, I already see young people thinking, I don't want to be part of this, and switching it off.
I'm reading The Anxious Generation just now, which talks a lot about the impact of the smartphone initially and social media and how our young people grow up through that. It's worth a read if you haven't. It's really interesting and it's making me think differently.
Well, I was asking kids, young people, I said, where do you get your news and your information? TikTok and Instagram. And that was it. And I was like, I don't think that'll work out that well for you. Particularly when you're doing your modern studies, you might have to read a bit more. But TikTok, so it's fascinating. So they've changed it. There's no putting, it's like Pandora's box. There's no putting it back, the lid back on. And we're going to have to adapt to how they are consuming information and how they live their lives online, because we visit the internet, they live in the internet.
I think that's a really good distinction, actually. I've got an adult son, he's 28, he has come off a number of social media platforms because he said, it's just bad news, it's just negativity. I'm still scrolling when I'm watching the TV and I think, I need to be more like him. And come out of that space, because the actual influence on young people, back to that bit about time in bedrooms and not with friends, it's really, really important.
And it is for when young people are going out the work environment. So I always take a lot of young people in, and some come with the right skills, but I even see it in interviews now, and I do quite a lot of interviews, sometimes other agencies. So this is just my personal experience. A lack of eye contact. So they can't hold eye contact with people. I think sometimes
it's good to look away now, Karyn.
Well, that's it, I know. And things like small talk, the ability to, ask you probing questions, these are all things that we learn, and we learn in concert with each other. If you're very isolated, just in your bedroom on your own, if you're a school refuser, if your friendship group are frittering away or they're only online, I don't know how you learn those skills.
We've talked a lot about teachers, actually, but in that community space, the work of CLD colleagues, and I hear a lot, again, visiting schools and local authorities, about that wider impact of getting young people to be part of wider community initiatives, action, group, etc. Do you see lots of examples of that too?
I see some great examples. I also see examples, and in fact it was done in the East End of Glasgow. They did this big a community in motion, alongside like some Nancy Clooney and a whole range of teachers in the East End of Glasgow. And we had Peak, who took out all the kids and they all ran around like velociraptors for a couple of hours. And then we had all the parents, we had hundreds of the parents, they all came in at night. We ordered pizza, so we all ate together, we all sat down at tables. And then we had a whole range of things. We taught them about social media, about what to look for on the kids' phones, about what was happening. But we also had Peter Lovett in, who he's a psychologist and he's a professional ballet dancer. And we did dancing in time to show, we're actually talking about dance in your kitchen with your kids. Turn up the radio, go and dance again, and just enjoy it. It doesn't cost you money. And then we got everybody dancing in time till a freakless chic. Honestly, it was hysterical. I have never laughed so much in my life. And all the parents were laughing with me. And like parents that would probably never have come near me from being in the police. And that sense of connection.
Absolutely.
You couldn't have paid enough for it. And I still get parents that will come up to me in the street and say, do you remember that time we were all dancing? And Nancy facilitated that. But what changed in the school was a real interesting thing. The school was part of the community. Completely entangled with the community. Parents would come in, they would often tell you what was happening in the house. There were, so the teachers had to deal with some extra stuff as well. Mm-hmm. But it was an absolute venue for the community. Yeah. And And in doing that, they made their communities better, they made their communities safer, and they made their kids safer.
Which brings you back to that prevention point that runs right through you.
It is, and it's not one thing.
No.
I mean, there's a great quote by a guy called Adam Gopnik, and he said, most of the time in the history of medicine, there is no miracle cure. Sometimes just building a well or getting people to wash their hands is like, that's how you solve disease. He said to look at things like, issues like crime before it dropped, was you would have to tackle the broken family, or you would have to build more jails, or all these things. He said the truth of it is, he said you just have to chip at problems until eventually you get to heart, and there is no miracle cure. There's just the intercession of 1,000 small sanities.
Oh, wow.
And I think that it's the 1,000 small sanities that are happening in schools around the country, in some places more than others, that is the key to change in Scotland.
That's
forever.
Really powerful. That's really powerful. And I guess encouragement for those schools, those communities where that is happening, to keep going. To keep going.
Yeah, if you change your behaviour. So if any of us want to, well, it's coming up to Christmas, so come January we'll all be trying to get on our jeans and they'll be too tight. And people will be thinking, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to stop smoking, I'm going to make a New Year's resolution. And if you're going to do that and you want a photo on your fridge, you don't put the worst photo of you ever and say, I don't want to be like that. You put the best picture of yourself in the fridge and you say, I want to be like that. You know, the one where you look all healthy and you look good and you think you probably look younger. That's always the thing, isn't it? And you put it in the fridge and you think, I want to be like that. So we have to tell people, don't think about all the bad stuff. Think about what's good and go towards that, because that's how you change.
And actually, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier with the media, some of the media perception, that isn't the reality of what you and I are talking about.
I don't talk about violence, and because there's a big thing around violence in school. I talk about dysregulated children. Mm-hmm. I have dysregulated adults who sometimes do some bad things, and the justice system needs to deal with them. But we often see dysregulated kids in the system, and particularly post-COVID, I think teachers are coping with a range of complexity that perhaps wasn't there before, at least not in the volumes that we have now. But all behaviour has meaning. Mm-hmm. All behaviour has meaning. And so we just need to understand what that meaning is. And, but I do take it is a hard profession to be in.
But I totally agree, but a great profession to be in.
But a great profession to be in.
I don't want us to run out of time without us. You said in your introduction about the fact that we have no under 18s in prison in Scotland. I'd just like you to talk a wee bit more about that. We talk about focus on achievements, but for a nation. So
for a nation, that is pretty amazing.
Absolutely.
We used to have thousands of under 18s, Many, I think it was like around 2008, it was around, I think we had 1,000 over the period. And then we had like almost 3,000 18 to 20-year-olds. And that has been a journey, so you talk about Harry Burns around how young people, around the understanding of trauma, around, and within the justice system, about trying to get young people out early, around the work of the children's hearing system. So it's been everybody, it's been a real collaborative approach with an end in sight. That's the goal. We want to have no under 18s. And eventually it got to the point that we only had 2 under 18s in Parliament before Christmas. Mm-hmm. And I think they thought, that's it. And the work of the Promise, which is, Fiona Duncan and Fraser McKinley and that team and all the local authorities around the experience of young people who end up in the care system, is really important because they were disproportionately affected by prison system, because through no fault of their own, they ended up in the justice system. And I mean, that's pretty catastrophic. So when I look at it now, I think, oh, grief, if we can do that, can I tell you, we can do anything. And we can do anything. I mean, if we can achieve that, and I spoke to Australia recently, and I said to Australia, we have no under 18s. And they were like, how on earth?
I was just going to ask you that very question. I was going to say, and are we now at a place where internationally
people
are looking at Scotland?
Of course they are. Don't get me wrong, we've got a whole range of other things that we need to fix, and the adult population's not going too well at the moment because of COVID backlog and a whole range of other things. But if you think about it, if you prevent people coming in, so if we've got 0 now, hopefully they'll never come back in. So maybe in 10, 15 years' time, the whole population will have gone down. Maybe the peak age will be 50, maybe 35, because they'll just have aged within that system. But new people won't be coming into the system. That's no bad thing.
No, it sounds like an amazing thing. But it's a lot. That's a long-term goal, and we've got to hold on. You talked here about small changes, but actually be really clear about the vision, the goal. You said there were lots of things, but the goal was no under 18s in adult prisons. So actually that continued vision and goal for Scotland feels really important.
And teachers did that. Teachers did that by preventing young people ending up being excluded. So I want to thank them. If this is the last minutes, I'd like to thank them for letting Scotland achieve something extraordinary. Now, there's always going to be some young people who might need some secure care environments because their need is so great. And without going into details, we know who those children are and those young people are. But can I tell you, if we can do that, I think we can do anything. I mean, you have to be relentlessly positive.
Absolutely. Karyn, I could ask more questions, but I can't think of a better note to end on than that. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to say thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Karyn, thanks.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe for notification of when a new episode is published. If there is a topic you would like to hear featured on this podcast, get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. Follow us on our social media channels for all the latest news from Education Scotland. Education Scotland is a Scottish Government executive agency charged with supporting quality and improvement in Scottish education.